mic isn't on. Okay.
So, how'd you like a Western, opening with a Western for the first time? I'm really interested to hear their conversation about it, but I forgot that I hadn't seen a Western for a long time. I grew up in a house with 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and we used to watch Westerns a lot, especially, but the Ponderosa and Little Joe and Hoss and all of them. So anyway, it was kind of interesting. I hadn't seen John Wayne on the screen for a long time, and it was just interesting to start the festival with something different. I'm really glad we did it, no matter. Anyway, what anyone says, I'm really glad that we started with something different for the first time in 26 years. And so now, help me welcome to the stage Dr. Eric Pearson, Brian Tellerico from RogerEbert.com, and Michael Phillips from the Chicago Tribune.
So thank you all for spending some time with us. It's when you engage with something and it seems like it's from a time gone by, or we've sort of moved on in lots of ways. I think that what's exciting about the Western, particularly this Western, is, you know, the Westerns were sort of built on a certain simplicity, right? Good guys and bad guys, and if you're really confused, white hats and black hats. Very simple. But when you get to this particular film in 1956, you get a character that's a bit more, shall we say, complicated. And this film, along with The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is also comes out in '56, you really see a sort of a transition into a sort of complicated, or at least a more nuanced presentation of our hero. And this was, in some ways, for John Wayne even, a big change, because if you know his work, he spent most of his career playing some version of himself all the time. So to be able to sort of embrace some of the nuances of this particular role was quite challenging for him. So I'm here with a couple of folks, and I come to this film as a scholar. I was interested in this idea of the Western and getting students to engage in a genre which we don't see a lot of anymore, but for a period of time was really one of the dominant sort of forms of storytelling that American audiences were exposed to. And whenever I show them this film, you're showing a contemporary audience, they teach me because they begin to sort of pick up on things that I didn't see, but they're always concerned with what exactly is this guy's problem? And how can we start to make sense out of it? And as I mentioned before, the film gets even more complicated in the fact that by the time it comes out in 1956, we've had, in May of '54, we have Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court. We also then, in 1955, get another ruling from the Supreme Court, which is, hey, we've ruled on this, and you guys need to move desegregation forward with sort of swift speed. So the world is a different place. 50 years of separate but equal, and the world changes. And in lots of ways, I read Ethan as reflective of that change and what happens when people won't change. We meet him, he's outside when the film begins, and he's outside when the film ends, and in many ways that becomes sort of symbolic of people's inability to accept change. But I want to hear from the other folks, and then we'll have a little conversation, and then we will take some questions from you all.
That's so much. Good work there. God, I don't know where to begin. The first thing I'm struck by is you say that we don't see a lot of Westerns nowadays, which is true. And yet the DNA of this movie is everywhere. Like, I see those door shots constantly. The memoriam segment we saw at the beginning, how many films in there were influenced by this film? Lucas claimed Star Wars was wildly influenced by this film. The opening scenes of the homestead, Tatooine is basically Monument Valley, all that stuff. Star Wars doesn't exist without this. David Lynch loved John Ford, famously played him in Fabelman. Spielberg loved John Ford. There was another one, Unforgiven. So it's one of those movies that I watch and I just see the ripple effect of this movie constantly. I mean, even in TV nowadays, I started thinking about Last of Us while watching this. A man who rides across the country to do increasingly irrational things, stuff like that. So it's just interesting to me that you say that Westerns don't really exist, and yet I feel like they kind of do. I feel like this movie is everywhere. That's what I think of when I see this movie.
I think that two things, and I hadn't seen it. I think like you, I had not seen it on a big screen ever, and I haven't seen it period in 25 years.
Yeah, me too.
And okay, 30-second detour. This was the Western genre is the genre I came to the last of any film genre to find a movie or two or three that I really loved in it. I didn't grow up with Westerns. I must have come out of the womb a congenital liberal weenie, not happy with the basic sort of tropes that Eric mentioned. I never really got what I wanted from them. Don't know why, As a kid, I started to learn maybe why as an adult, but then I found a few Westerns. One of them, John Ford's, not this one.
Which one?
Stagecoach. And Stagecoach is a very different kind of thing, because that's like basically Grand Hotel in the world's smallest space, right? That's a much different sort of story directive going on there. But I think your point to the, Brian, to just the stunningly wide influence, visually especially, and it also drug a lot of the tropes and images and, yes, cliches and, yes, baked in, partially examined racism. This is one hell of a complicated movie that probably still can be called a classic, and I'm wrestling with it for half my life now, truly. And I think the key debating point that has kept this movie sort of unruly, in your craw, and alive in the culture all these generations is this question of, is this image and this portrayal Wayne is giving of Ethan, as written, directed, and as acted, is it a truly complex portrait of a racist, corrosive racist soul who thaws by the end, or is that sort of a veneer on top in a movie and in a style that John Wayne is well used to playing in maybe less grandiose circumstances? So is it, what sort of tortured soul is Ethan, or is he just a person that a lot of, I think your average 2/3 percentage of any student group around the age of 18 to 25 tend to, smart, and every kind of student, every kind of person, have a lot, that's a lot to get over. That's a lot to get over.
Is it a deconstruction of racism? Is it a deconstruction of the genre, or is it just racism? I mean, tough question to answer. I mean, Ford notoriously didn't apologize for any of the depictions of Native Americans in this film. He reportedly said that's how it was, quote. So are we looking at it through modern eyes, and can you really avoid that is the big question.
Yeah, John Ford is a sort of this figure that when we go to the movies today and we see the Scorseses and the Spielbergs, what is often gets lost is John Ford is technically a pretty brilliant director. He 4 Oscars for directing, and I don't think anybody's ever going to get close to that in sort of contemporary terms. Weirdly, though, none of them for directing Westerns, right? Directing sort of different types of films. It's one of the things that makes the film so interesting, and I know that some of you will leave here and go, I gotta see this again, because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's I don't know what the deal with Ethan and Martha is.
Yeah.
There's this really sort of interesting moment where his brother asks him about being in California, but he directs his answer to Martha, and we're never quite clear of what their relationship is. And as you walk sort of through the film, there's all this sort of looks and structures about the way in which characters interact with one. Even if that Captain Clayton really sort of spends a lot of time noticing the way that Martha caresses the coat before they ride away, and you're trying like, what is he thinking? And so it's one of the things that makes the film really rich is that you dive into it and you realize that there's a lot of stuff going on, but neither John Wayne nor John Ford will help you to figure any of that stuff out, right? You have to dive in on your own.
I will say that having not seen it in a long time, the subtle, meaningful glances seem a hell of a lot less subtle every time I see this movie. But
there's a theory that Debbie's his daughter, and the way Martha looks at that coat, the way they look at each other. I mean, it's again, yes, I forgot how unsubtle it is. I thought, oh, that's something I'll bring to the audience. No, it's right.
I mean, there's stuff. I will say this: whatever film we're talking about tonight, it happens to be The Searchers. But for any film that might be shown in this context, or just that we see, any film throughout history is in some way or in 100 ways, even if you love it, problematic, dated. They all are. They all are. The attitudes within the films are not meant to be evergreen, But the film itself can be evergreen in ways that this time through, I guess it's because it's when everybody shuts up, and you can appreciate Ford's casual but sort of intuitively brilliant eye, where every time this movie, about a half a dozen times, adding up to about 45 seconds of screen time, where you get a complete silhouette, totally silhouette character, hanging from the rock, being dropped, in and out of the doorway, which, I mean, that is one of the most exquisite visual bookends in film history. And it's those moments, and I don't want to say it's only those 45 seconds that I am attracted to, or I am maybe less confounded by, but that's where you're dealing with somebody who, just based on Stagecoach, again, a generally pretty unpretentious picture. This one is not good. But directors as wildly different and equally inspired as Orson Welles and Vincent Minnelli said Stagecoach. That taught me more than anything in my life when I was coming up in Hollywood.
I know what you're saying about films being dated and problematic, but I think what's interesting about this one is how foregrounded it is and how it's become part of the conversation about the film. In other words, is the problematic aspects, are they intentional, are they deconstruction, or are they just presentation? I think is the big question we still don't know the answer to, because like you said, Ford and Wayne didn't feel like telling us, and it's a fascinating example to watch this movie every 20 years as culture changes and as history changes and get something new out of it. So it's the robust filmmaking combined with the continued refreshing thematic relevance kind of created by the mystery of the people who made it.
Right. And it, as I said, it enters the public discourse when, because I think it's often hard for us to understand that in 1956 you had, schools, districts shutting down rather than desegregate, right? You had armed people standing outside of schools so that children couldn't enter to be educated. And I think sometimes we forget where we've come from in terms of our dialogue about these issues. But I'm of the mindset, in 1956, like we look at Eaton, it's like, oh, that guy is just completely, his racism is just off the charts. I'm going to argue that in 1956, there might have been people watching the film says, he's kind of reasonable, because if my daughter went and hung out with those people, whoever those people happen to be, I don't know if I would welcome her back into my home. And that's a reality of the time. And it makes the film speak differently about this particular issue. And that's films enter into the public discourse at all kinds of moments. And I don't think that Wayne and Ford were trying to make a movie about the sort of the racial time. But miscegenation is the only thing that's mentioned in the Hays Code, which is, there's a lot of stuff, but the fact that they single that out and say, you shouldn't do films about this, and then it gets complicated because it's a certain kind of miscegenation, because Ethan has no problem with Mrs. Pauly and Luke. He has no problem with that relationship at all. In fact, he uses it for great humor. So there's a certain kind of crossing that boundary that is more problematic than others.
Yeah, that stuff hurts, I gotta say, to watch this time. I mean, that's where I just thought, there's a lot of the Yumpin' Yuminy comic relief that just does not help this film, period, I think. But those scenes we're talking about, especially the roll down the hill, where it's really kind of like, that's a long 3 seconds. And it was such a strange year for movie obsessive, 56, because you had Gregory Peck giving it a shot as Ahab and Moby Dick, and
Influenced this movie,
yeah,
or this storytelling, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Hitchcock was already preparing for Vertigo, certainly the most obsessive and one of his biggest flops ever. He ever made a very uncomfortable portrait of a fatal romantic, James Stewart, let's call him. Interesting in the book of the Searcher's novel this is based on. Ethan's killed off, and it does not save Debbie, but
Loosely based on a true story, supposedly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's all. And as to your point, in sort of the historical timeline,
They weren't killing off John Wayne. They were never going to kill
no, in fact, I think he's still alive, actually. But in 52, like the 50s, things were happening slowly but quickly in some ways. High Noon comes out in 52. Very controversial within Hollywood, because half of Hollywood, at least, including John Wayne, vocally detested that commie red film. This guy, this untrustworthy weasel played by Gary Cooper, looking to get a whole bunch of the townsfolk killed in a mission he should be, working on himself. I mean, that's how that film was read. Howard Hawks, one of my favorite directors, hated that film, and he made Rio Bravo in '59, another John Wayne film, as a complete rebuke to High Noon. Keep the townsfolk out of it. So, I mean, the political strains in Hollywood were not certain. They were, I think Ford, he made this movie not quite at his peak, but it was certainly a success, but it was the beginning of the end in a way. He did make Cheyenne Autumn in '64, which in a way was his, not apology, but his compliment, let's say, to actually treating the First Nation characters like human beings instead of symbols here.
I mean, it muddies the picture a lot to consider.
Wait, hold on, was that grunt you did? Was
No,
sort
I
of
didn't
like
do a
a
grunt, don't worry.
nah.
No, don't worry about it. No. It muddies the water a little bit. This was basically just him trying to make a hit. Like in terms of if we're talking about deconstruction of an artistic purpose, he came off Mr. Roberts, which was just before this, which apparently was a horrible shoot. Broke up his relationship with multiple people. He hated doing it. And so they brought him a John Wayne Western, and he thought he would need a comeback after Mr. Roberts, which went on to, of course, be a hit and win Oscars and stuff. But he was already in production on that by the time he realized that. So in a sense, I think they thought of this as a John Wayne hero slam dunk hit movie, which then, of course, you talk about speaking directly to issues of the day. Maybe that was accidental, and maybe that doesn't matter. Like, it's that whole idea between authorial intent and artistic interpretation, and is it really important?
Yeah, and once you deliver that to the public, it's the public's film.
Correct.
It's not your film anymore. It belongs to the people, and the people will respond to it maybe in ways that you're not happy with, or maybe ways that you hadn't anticipated, but they're responding to those images on the screen. And you have to, at some point, you have to sort of accept that and maybe chalk it up to bad timing or whatever the case may be. But this is a really interesting film to wrestle with. And oftentimes, when I'm teaching students, it's about the wrestling. It's not about getting to the right answer. It's not about this is what it means. It's about the wrestling that happens as you try to work your way through this particular piece of film. But we are going to go to the audience for people who have questions. Do we have people with mics that can sort of, is that the way we're working? Yeah? Okay. So I see a gentleman right there who's looking for a mic.
Okay, I
Sure.
have a question here.
Yes.
Hello. John Ford has been described as one of the early Hollywood auteurs. So what characterizes a John Ford film, and in what way does this film either underscore or diverges from a John Ford film?
I think in a lot of ways it's one of the things that I'm always is the sort of like the zoom in on the face where you're supposed to like this sort of tight shot of people's reaction and sort of lingering on that. I think that one of the reasons why he was, people sort of talk about him as an auteur. He did a lot of different films, but other than sort of the technical sort of precision that he had as a filmmaker, it becomes really hard to say, how is The Searchers like The Grapes of Wrath? Or, How Green Is My Valley? I mean, he did a lot. And one of the interesting stories is he actually directed the film Pinky, which is one of the sort of first social problem films. And they fired him. Daryl Zanuck fired him because said he didn't understand the material. So I would certainly say he's an auteur, but it becomes really hard to sort of, because he worked in so many different genres over his career. I mean, the same guy that directed Mr. Roberts directed The Searchers. I mean, those are two very, very different films.
He knew where to put a horizon.
I'd say that, he was the easy kind of place to start with that is just kind of how crazy he was for the image, the iconography of the American West, especially. But to your point, he made a lot more than westerns, and in fact, those are the movies that aren't westerns of his I tend to admire more than the westerns. Except there are some, parts of this absolutely.
My Darling Clementine.
Yeah, those are the films I really respond to.
That's
My Darling
my favorite.
Clementine, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. I love a film called Wagon Master from 1950. Anybody seen that in here? It's hard. It's almost plot. Thank you. That's good. Yeah, that's why everybody remembers. It's such a classic. Everybody just watches every Christmas. But it's a wonderful, almost plot-free Western, very leisurely, and that's where you really see what he's up to visually, because there's nothing to take your mind off. It's a very small film, but I don't know how else you say it, but there's something about the technique of the rightness of maybe not so much here, but especially when he was coming up, 30s and 40s, other directors coming in, Orson Welles, Minnelli, Masters, saw it, and I don't think either one of them would be called like typical Western fans in their tastes, but the visual rightness of it without any ostentation.
Yeah.
There's ostentation in this movie, but half of it's on the soundtrack is a Max Skyner's score, which, boy, he never missed an obvious cue in his life.
Never miss an obvious cue.
I mean, it sounds cheesy, but confident filmmaking. I mean,
Yeah.
every single one of those films is just so robustly made and confident. He never held back, never above.
Right. Was there another question over here, or we have one?
You have a question in the balcony, all the way up in the center.
Okay. If you say you're up there, you're up there.
I was curious if you guys have hinted at John Wayne and John Ford's ideologies a little bit. I was wondering if you guys could fill that in and how that affects how we read this film.
One of the first things I try to teach my students is, man, they do not make movie stars like they used to. And this connection between the individual and the roles that they play. John Wayne was historically very conservative in his beliefs, particularly later in his life. Did some interviews, particularly the one in Playboy magazine, where he expresses some views. The native people, they were selfishly withholding land from others, kind of thing. So. But I think that both of them would defend. They wouldn't defend themselves. That's the point. They wouldn't defend themselves. They wouldn't defend their politics. They would just say, "We just make movies," and us intellectualizing this film. John Ford would want none of that.
Ford was also a notoriously difficult filmmaker. Like, he did a lot of obnoxious things. He reportedly had the actor who played Scar show up regularly, get into full makeup, even though it wasn't his day, just to hang out on the set, just because he felt like it. So he was controlling, I guess would be the word used nowadays, stuff like that. So he had a reputation of being difficult, so he worked with the same people that he knew he could work with. Again, he worked with Fonda repeatedly, he worked with Wayne repeatedly, people who got on his wavelength.
Also, I mean, the guy's career went back to 1914, I think.
Yeah.
There's a short-ish film called The Musketeers of Pig Alley, which is commonly referred to as the first gangster film ever. And it's also
a deep cut
that's
there.
That's an extremely interesting little movie, because it is also not just the first gangster movie, but it's also a kind of a half sinister, half very sympathetic view of these law-breaking, kind of attractive rebels, you know what I mean? And I think that streak is certainly in the American character, and it's all over John Ford the whole damn way.
And I mean, they made 14 films together, starting with Stagecoach, and John Wayne really owes much of his career to John Ford. I mean, before Stagecoach, he sort of languished as a bit player in films and that kind of thing, but that synergy between the two of them really benefited them both in terms of their visibility as individuals in the film industry. There is a question over here. Yes?
Yeah, any thoughts about John Wayne in a red and white check shirt with his holster over his shirt and his jeans rolled up?
That whole, like, we're going down to New Mexico and then that costume change is an odd thing, but it's and I don't know, in their minds they're like, okay, we're going down to New Mexico, this is New Mexico-ish, and maybe this is something that we should do, but I can't speak for the costume design.
What are your thoughts? And I didn't have any thoughts on it before, but now I'm never going to stop thinking about it.
I thought it was super weird because, like, I've seen a lot of cowboy movies as a kid, red and white check gingham screams picnic. A shirt untucked is not a cowboy, and rolled up jeans are in fashion now, but not in. So I don't know where that was from. That's why I thought it was super weird.
You wonder if that wasn't some former member of the Communist Party. 20 years later, somebody's working as like a costumer's assistant. They're just kind of trying to mess with them or something.
Yeah. Did I hand right over here? Oh, okay. So you got the mic there. Go ahead. Is it? Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So thanks to you three, I stopped going to Westerns a long time ago for obvious reasons, but because you were here and I love Ebertfest and I'm Holland and I knew it a lot of my horizons, so thank you. But can you say something about, I know we have the ASPCA now, but the way Westerns are horrible about the way they ride the horses and make them tumble down sand dunes and drown in the water and et cetera. It really just breaks my heart.
Yeah, and it is. There's.
She was
Yeah,
at. Oh yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead. She was sort of, we've spent a lot of time now on sort of the treatment of animals in films that we didn't back at the time. And there's some moments in this film, the scene where they're sort of riding up this stiff embankment, and you can see not just the actors are struggling, but the horses are struggling, and that kind of thing. And I just think that's just a reflection of the time, where if something happened to an animal, they would just replace it with another animal and sort of move on, kind of thing. But it's also, we've come a long way. We realize that there's some things that we can't do anymore, and that's a movement forward, which I think is something that we should celebrate. I had a question over here, and then we'll take two more, and then we got to wrap it up. Go ahead.
This movie really surprised me, but I just wanted to say there was one scene fairly early on that really did scream George Lucas to me. I was like, he had to have really liked this movie. It was when they were led away from the homestead for nefarious reasons. They realized that. They go back.
Yeah.
It's definitely Tatooine when Uncle Owen and
Yeah.
Aunt Beru, and I was like, and he punches the kid because he doesn't want him to see his aunt.
Right.
And I was like, that is so harsh. Everybody's punching people. Everybody's throwing everything down. But in Star Wars New Hope, obviously that doesn't happen. But Lucas takes it a step further, and this is gonna freak out my seatmate. I always had to pause it to see Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's like skeletons outside, like the smoking. And I was like, George Lucas would take it a step further. But anyway, I was curious what you think struck other filmmakers about this movie so much that they wanted to emulate it in their films, or what scenes in other movies made you think of this one?
Like I was saying, I think it's everywhere. I see it in so many things that are Western or Western adjacent. All the Star Wars stuff, of course, so it's reflected in Andor. I just reviewed Last of Us. I see it there. Like it's the robustness of the filmmaking. It's the framing. It's the door shots and the homestead shots, which have been repeated numerous times. That shot of him at dusk or dawn coming over and whistling over, I feel like we've seen that 500 times. It influenced so many things. I mean, even That'll Be the Day became a Buddy Holly song. So, I mean, it became part of pop culture almost instantly. Scorsese said it influenced Taxi Driver, someone going down a rabbit hole and getting crazier and crazier and then going in. So,
I think that's what Paul Schrader certainly talked about that, who wrote Taxi Driver and Hardcore. There's a very simple narrative line for a screenwriter struggling to figure out a story. If you just have an obsessive father figure, possibly sociopathic, Travis Bickle, Ethan here, if you really squint, I guess, maybe he is, but I don't think so. I don't think the movie goes that far, God knows. But that's a very simple line to follow, and it occasions a lot of violence. Right. And that's enough for a screenwriter with a little film history in him to kind of follow that path and see how it goes.
and so many of the filmmakers of the 70s that we're talking about, like Scorsese and Spielberg and Schrader, all loved John Ford. So this was kind of seen as a major Ford opus that they would then copy and mimic. I mean, you see Stagecoach and things too. You see other Ford. But it's interesting that this became the Ford, especially because it's one of his few films that got no Oscar nominations. So at the time, people didn't know how to respond to it. I think it kind of quickly became what it was, but right when it came out, people didn't know how to take it.
And now that you've seen the film, you'll see it in other places. I mean, the scene between sort of the Harvey Keitel character and Trav, where they're standing on the stairs and he's got the long hair, that is Ethan and Scar facing each other for the first time. It is that sort of moment moved to a different film. So I think that now that you've seen it, you'll see it a lot more, because with all of his problems, his influence on contemporary film and contemporary filmmakers shouldn't be minimized. Again, lots of problematic images, which I think is why some people are like, oh, that guy. But technically, just a master at his craft. So we'll take one more question and then we'll.
I have one more from House right here.
Okay.
Hi, and thank you for being here tonight. Two questions. One is this the first time that Monument Valley was used as a set, basically? And the second one is, my husband observed this, and I thought so too, is that this movie is really surreal to me. I mean, starting out with the cattle that are living on sand, it's just really strange. But the other thing is even the spears and the cattle, and you never see an Indian carrying a spear again in the movies. About 9 feet long, how could they even throw it? So anyway, just bring it in.
Well, I mean, John Ford is the person that's responsible for like putting Monument Valley on the map in terms of an iconic place to shoot westerns. And so, and again, you are right. There are things, but there's just, I'll sort of wrap it up with this. The Ethan is complicated. He's his animus toward the native people is just it's off the charts. I mean, even the fact that he desecrates dead bodies, just like one more thing.
Shoots the eyes.
Yeah, shoots the guy's eyes, and then Scar's already dead, and he's like, well, I'm gonna take a scalp just to sort of add insult to injury. But he seems to know their ways, he seems to know their customs, he seems to know their language. So he's done some interaction with them, but you leave this film with a lot of questions. One of them is like, where has he been for 3 years while the Civil War is over? Right, like where has he been and what has he been doing? And there are all those questions running through the film, which I think makes it rich for conversation and dialogue and engagement. And I am so pleased that you all stayed to spend some time with us. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks for watching.